So this video is going to be talking about quadrants. We'll be focusing on everything that you need to understand inside the quadrant. Let's get into it.
The first thing you need to know about the quadrant is, it sounds easy, but you need to understand that there are 4 quadrants. And the 4 quadrants are divided by 90 degrees. So what I mean is that for the first quadrant, it goes from 0 to 90, while the second goes from 90 to 180, and the third goes from 180 to 270, and the fourth goes from 270 to 360. Whenever you use your trig ratio in each of your quadrants, they give you different values. Sometimes they are positive, sometimes they are negative. So for the first quadrant, if you put in a value that falls between 0 and 90, let's say we put in 30. You put sine 30, cos 30, tan 30. You will notice that the values you get for each and every one of them are positive. So all trig ratios in this quadrant is positive. While for the second quadrant, we try out a value that falls between 90 and 180. So let's say we put in 100. We notice that only sine is positive. However, your cos and your tan give you a negative answer. Now for the third quadrant, we try out a value that falls between 180 and 270. So let's say we put in 210. For this quadrant, we understand that tan is positive, but cos and sine are negative values. And for the final quadrant, which goes from 270 to 360, and we substitute something like 300, so now for this quadrant, we also see that only cos is positive, while tan and sine is negative. Now what I'm trying to explain in every single one of this, and I'm going to try to clean all this out so I can concentrate on the most important things. So focusing on the most important thing, we understand that in the first quadrant, all trig ratios are positive. So your sine, your cos, your tan. In the second quadrant, when we tried substituting sine, cos, and tan, only sine ended up positive. In the third quadrant, we understand that only tan ended up positive. And finally, in the fourth quadrant, we understand only cos ended up positive. Now, it's very important you memorize this. You can memorize this using the acronym CAST, which means cos, all, sine, and tan.
Now that you understand quadrants a little bit better, let's take it up a notch. Now we're going to be talking about equations of each quadrant. So that's what we're going to be talking about next.
Now that we've learned about the quadrants, the size of each of the quadrants, the trig ratios that are positive for each of the quadrants, you also need to know the equation for each of the quadrants. The first quadrant, the equation of this quadrant is theta. While the second quadrant, it's 180 minus theta. The third quadrant is 180 plus theta. And the fourth quadrant is 360 minus theta. Now, if you have a value that is greater than 360, because this quadrant only accounts for values that goes from 0 to 360. If you notice your value is greater than 360, it falls in the first quadrant, which is 360 plus theta. We normally use this formula when theta is greater than 360. You also need to understand that each quadrant has its own formula. So for the first is theta, second is 180 minus theta, third is 180 plus theta, and the last quadrant is 360 minus theta. And whenever you have a value that is greater than 360, we normally say that it's 360 plus theta.
And that's it. We will be talking about reduction formula next. I had to talk about quadrant first because it is a stepping stone into reduction formula. You need to understand your quadrant, because if you need to reduce a particular value, you have to understand how the quadrants work. Now that you have a better understanding, you shouldn't have so much of a problem. And on your way out, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you.